Yo, what's up, everyone? My name's Eamon Castles, and today I'm going to be joined by Quenton Albertie, an NBA writer for Last Word on Sports. Together, we're going to discuss the current state of NBA media coverage. We're going to dive into how podcasts and social media has created sort of a new style of coverage and both the positives and negatives of that, while also comparing podcasts to other media forms such as TV shows and written articles. Without any further ado, let's bring on Quentin and get into this conversation. First things first, joined by Quentin Alberati of Last Word on Sports. How you doing today, Quentin?
Pretty well. How about you doing? I mean, pretty well. How about yourself?
I'm pretty good. Yeah, just hanging out. Getting ready to record this pod. Yeah, let's dive into it. So, how would you describe the current state of authentic sports coverage, or just style of sports coverage that we're receiving in general?
I mean, in general, I feel like there's just been a lot of shifts. Like, I feel like there's conversations about there being like a big shift or like a major change, but I feel like it's been a whole bunch of more subtle changes that have happened as well. So it's like, you compare coverage now, what years? I mean, it's about to be 2025. So 2025, you compare it to like even just 2020, like around COVID time, right? Like that's when everybody started like the amount of podcasts. I mean, like people are already podcasts, you know what I mean? But it was only like it wasn't as many as there are now, you know what I mean? So it's like now I feel like that's become the main source of like what people really want to hear. Like people don't like it was already clear that people prefer different mediums than just reading. But I feel like when podcasting became a big thing, that's when people became aware like, oh, they'd rather hear it in their car or this and that, which makes sense because I mean sometimes you might not have time to sit down and like read an article. Like who knows? You know what I mean? Like especially like you might be in class. You know what I mean? And you don't really want to show exactly what you're listening to, but you could pop in the headphones and listen to a podcast. Like so, even that. So I think that's just one thing about it. Like I think that is like it's painted as a picture as a big change, but even though there has been a major change, I think it's just a whole bunch of smaller things that's made it shift in general.
Yeah, absolutely. That definitely makes a lot of sense. And there's certainly been a rise in podcasts in general. And I'm just curious to get your perspective on if you feel like this brings us more of like an authentic style of coverage because podcasts allow for more of like nuanced and
You
detailed
know,
discussions, whereas like TV shows, like First Take, stuff like that, has to be really quick and it's more debate style. Or do you feel like some of these podcasts can lean more towards that like sensationalized style of coverage?
I think it's both. I think, it's kind of like a double-edged sword because just like how there's people that say they like to like even like call or be in person rather than text. I think you because you get more personality that way. So I think that's one thing about like podcasts and just audio in general. Like you might be able to it's like when I hear what's his name, Jake Fisher, or watch Jake Fisher's podcast, like I don't know, maybe when I read him, I wouldn't have got the sense of sense of guy he is. But when I watch him on those podcasts, it's very clear. Like, okay, that's probably why like executives talk to you. You do seem like the type of guy like you're just a regular guy type thing. So it's like I think that's one way about it, but I think it does also lend towards the sensationalism because that's what sells. People like reactions, like, and I think Stephen A. Smith probably is the biggest example we have of being real reactionary to stuff. But I think everybody started to buy into that. I think honestly around the same time that they started making Stephen A. Like the face of ESPN, so to speak. That's when I noticed a lot of people leaning more into like like on the one hand, yeah, they are showing their personality, but they're also like trying to hit home a point. Like it doesn't matter if they're right or wrong. They're trying to hit home a point and they'll be loud, they'll be obnoxious if need be. But yeah, I think it's a double edged sword.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's I really double-edged sword is the perfect way I would describe it. Even with the Stephen A. Smith example, I feel like just listening to his podcast compared to when he's on First Take or any of those ESPN shows, there's a massive difference in just the way he talks about
Right.
issues. Like podcasting, he can be a lot more nuanced, a lot less critical, a lot more open-minded, where as when I see him on ESPN, he just sort of seems like a talking head and I don't really want to listen to him, but it's pretty cool that we can get that other side of him on the podcast.
Right. Yeah, he is more subtle on his podcast. And then I think it's because he dives into maybe because he picks his own topics, but like he seems like he's more he seems more well rounded when he's on his podcast. So I think that's what I think about it. I definitely noticed that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just sort of thinking more about like that TV style of coverage and more of that like sensationalized style of coverage. Where do you see, what's your take on like sort of personal agendas against players? Because that's something I feel like I see quite a bit in the media.
You know, it's crazy because on the one hand, media, I mean, most people who cover media, I mean, cover sports in the media, they are fans. You know what I mean? So it's like you understand that aspect of it. So it's like me, for instance, I grew up as a Cavs fan. When I watch the Warriors, you know, I feel a tingle in my heart. Had to go through some tough times with them, you know what I mean? But if I just sat here and bashed Steph Curry all day, but I also want to make it seem like I'm trying to give you objective coverage, you know, I can't do both. I can't have it both ways, so to speak. So I do think that's a problem that's in the media. Like, yeah, everybody's a fan of something. Like everybody grew up watching something and they just have that fan base. Like you're a Celtics fan, you know what I mean? So I'm sure you don't necessarily like enjoy watching the Lakers, you know what I mean? So, but I've never seen you sit there and bash LeBron or Anthony Davis or any of that. So it's like that same thing. So I do think people have to just be a little bit wary of that. But I also think, even besides that, I think it becomes a thing to where there are just certain guys that people love to hate. Now I feel like if you're talking about like Draymond's history of just doing things that he shouldn't do on the court. You know what I mean? Like I don't think it's necessarily bashing anybody to be like, yeah, he makes bonehead plays or he does bonehead things like, you know, because you're also like 35, like so it's kind of crazy to just get text like, goodness gracious, like like some of the things he does is like, yeah, if he was 10 years younger, maybe, but like, but yeah, but I also feel like a guy like Rudy Gobert, for instance, like yeah, you could talk about his defense, but also just feel like it's a point where it goes from we just talking about this guy like yeah he sucks at doing that, or you know he needs to change that. So it just becomes like it feels real, almost feels personal.
Yeah, no, definitely. I feel like the Gobert example is a really good one because, on one hand, as sort of a writer or journalist, I definitely feel like it's fair to sort of criticize his versatility or lack thereof on defense when he's won four
Right.
Defensive Player of the Years. But at the same time, some people go way too far and then it sort of is piling up on a guy and they're just going
Yeah.
based off what other people have said in a way. And then they also
Right.
take away from the fact that he is one of the best rim protectors in the league, and he does provide immense value defensively.
Right. And that's a good point about it because I do think people get so focused on the negatives, they start like you said, just ignoring like the positives about it. Like, yeah, Rudy Gobert. Yeah, I don't want him on the perimeter all day. There's a lot of centers I don't want on the perimeter all day, but yeah, definitely not Rudy Gobert. But at the same time, he is an incredible rim protector, and I think we also forget like he won a lot of his success came towards the beginning, or like his popularity growth came at the beginning of his career. So like that was a time when there were more, or it was less about the spacing and everything. So you needed a guy like Rudy Gobert to enforce the paint. So he was definitely at least two or three of those Defensive Player of the Year awards. He deserved those because it's like, yeah, at that time, that's what kind of defender you really needed. But it's become more versatile now. So it's like, yeah, you can make those arguments like, yeah, I might rather want Wemby to win the award because at least he could hold up on the perimeter more. So, but yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, for sure. So, is there another player that you feel like has been unfairly criticized recently in the media?
Hmm. Well, you know, speaking of the Timberwolves, it's weird. I feel like Julius Randle is another guy, but I feel like even before he got to the Timberwolves, like when he was with the Knicks, he was just a guy. And I mean, the Knicks are harder than their guys like R.J. Barrett and Carmelo got the mob coming after him. But I feel like Julius Randle's just a guy like another thing. Like he has his flaws as a player. Like he holds on to the ball too much. He's one of those tweener guys where it kind of is a problem that he doesn't have a true position because it is like, yeah, you just you're not enough of a wing, but you're also not enough of a big. So it's like you're giving us great things, but you leave a lot on the table. You defensively, you know, you can say this and that about him. So it's like I understand the conversations about him, but I feel like it just takes away from the fact, like, you know, for a guy to be 6'8", 250, like about LeBron's size and consistently putting up 25 and 5, like he's done it like 5, 6 years in a row. Like we might be underrating this guy. Like, so I mean, like, yeah, is he the best? No. But kind of like even Brandon Ingram, like, you could do better than a Brandon Ingram, but you could definitely do worse. So that's how I look at certain guys too. Like you're not gonna find too many of those guys. And if we could, we wouldn't be looking for them or talking about like them all the time. And Zach Levine is another one. Like, and people make it seem like all he does is shoot, which I mean that is probably his greatest strength. But if there was a lot of guys that could put up 25 points per game and shoot 40% from three, they would. And that's how I feel about him too. So it's like, yeah, there's flaws with players, but I think yeah, people just get too into that mob mentality of yeah, let's pile onto this guy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's a lot of good points there. And the Randall point, especially this year, I feel like he's received a lot of sort of unfair criticism for how the Timberwolves season has started. I mean, they're out of the playoff picture. It's definitely disappointing after coming off a Western Conference
Right.
Finals and then making that big trade for him. So I can definitely see, like, on the surface level, how people would just immediately point to, oh, they traded Cat. They got Randall and DiVincenzo back, and now they're not as good. So it's automatically all on Randall. But at the same time, when you watch the Timberwolves, there's quite a bit more going on than just Randall's play. And he is playing at still
Yeah.
a fairly high level, averaging over 20 points, shooting decent percentages. So there's a lot more to break down that people just kind of neglect and they just try to point out Randall because he's like the bigger star and they traded for him. Another guy I'd like to throw in with sort of your examples was Trae Young, just because over the
Oh
last few
yeah.
years people have been super critical. They use the empty stats term. The empty stats term that never really makes sense to me because yeah, on one hand, like you're definitely on a contending team, you might not be putting up like 30 and 10 if you're like a guy like Trey Young, but like how many guys in the
Right.
league can really put up those type of numbers? And at the same time with Trey Young, we're talking about a guy that led his team to the conference finals in 2021 without a single all-star teammate. The only all-star teammate he's ever had is DeJounte Murray. And that was a terrible
Yeah.
fit position-wise because they both need the ball in their
Yeah.
hands to be successful. So I feel like that's just another guy whose sort of accomplishments go overlooked just because of a lack of winning, even though the roster has never really been there around him.
Yeah, I will say Trey Young does get a lot of flack, and it's funny because I've always felt like he's one of the best passers in the league. I think that what was it that ESPN the GM survey that came out at the beginning of the season or before the season started or whatever. Like I think they left him off of the best passers list. And I was like, that's crazy because he's like one of the best passers. Like I'm not saying he had to say he's the best, but I didn't see him getting any votes. Like so that's like 10, 15 players. Like so nobody said Trey Young. Like crazy, but um like again, like we were saying, like yeah, you could say there's things that were flaws. Like I mean, his defense, or whatever. But I never, yeah, I wouldn't even say his stats were empty because a lot of those times his team really needed him to get points. It's like not necessarily that he's the only shot creator or shot maker, but he's their best one. So it's like when everybody else is bottled up or like, and then there's been so many injuries. So like if DeAndre Hunter or somebody else like either is not hot or they're just not available. I mean, what are you going to do besides get the ball to Trey Young? It's kind of like Allen Iverson back in the day. Like he's sharing the court with freaking Eric Snow, and like what do you think he's going to do? So it's like, yeah, I would definitely would say he had empty stats. Like, yeah, that is crazy though. Yeah, I didn't know that people were saying
Yeah,
that.
no, definitely. I mean, you brought up Iverson, which I feel like is a really good example. And I was just curious, just when do you feel like you notice the shift in terms of like players getting like hyper criticized more? And what role do you think like social media sort of plays in that?
Also, I think that's the only time I ever really noticed. I mean, it's really sometimes it's a build up with some players. I mean, sometimes it's just a quick reaction after a game, um, like I think LeBron, for instance, like just last week, people were like saying he's washed because he had like a week of bad game. Now, could it be a turning point in his the father time chase? It could be, but it's also like just like 2 weeks ago, we were saying like, oh, he's defeating father time. So I feel like some of it's just like just purely reactionary, but sometimes I feel like it's a slow build up. Like, oh, we've been watching this guy. Jalen Green is probably a guy I use. Like, we've been watching you be streaky for about 3 years now. So like nobody's really sure what to say about you. But I've noticed that you get a lot of flack when he signed that contract extension. Like people are like, well, why would you give him that amount? It's like, I mean, yes, but also like, what are you going to do? Just, I mean, he was playing well at the time extension talks came up. Like, so you're just going to let him walk away? It's like, but I also feel like that's a player where there's more nuance that needs to go into it because like he is streaky, but he actually really has under Ime Udoka, he's actually taking real strides with his defense and he used to just float around on the court. You know what I mean? Like if he wasn't scoring, he just be there. But now he's actually like inserting himself into the game more, and I feel like that's what's helped him keep getting minutes and why, even if he isn't hitting, because I mean, no player is ever going to have like I think I saw Anthony Edwards say it's like it's 82 games. You're not going to be good every game. So it's like I understand, you know, he might just it might just be low sometimes. You know, he has more than the usual player, but I feel like you have to do things that help you stay on the court regardless. And so I feel like using Jalen Green for the example, like people don't look at the nuances enough. And I think on social media, it's a lot of fans who either they don't look for the nuances or don't really care. And I think that, like you said, to that point, like on social media, you might see we have so many Centel type accounts now. So it's like, you know, I think it's something called Hater Report, something called Brick something, Bricks
Rick
Muse.
Center.
Like, yeah, Bricks Hitter, yeah. So it's like, it's so many of those type of accounts now too. So you might get 39,000, 50,000 likes on a player having a bad game, and who knows, it could be his first bad game in like a week. But you weren't paying attention to that. You just saw he stunk it up that game, and so I think that's another thing, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, with the Green example, going back to like the contract point, I thought that was a really good point because I couldn't really understand why people were criticizing that contract, especially from the Rockets standpoint. I mean, the alternative was he becomes a unrestricted free agent, you potentially lose him for nothing. So worst case, if this doesn't work out or they want to chase a star or something, he could be a very valuable trade piece. And in terms of
Yeah,
like his
honestly, a
on-court
lot of
play,
people making a lot of money. Right. Yeah, my fault. I was just saying, I was like, yeah, honestly, a lot of people making the same amount of money he is. So, like you said, he is. You could trade him.
no, exactly. Yeah, I feel like the contract stuff, it's just only going to go up. That's the other thing. So 30 million 5 years from now, it's not going to look like that much at all, really, which is crazy to
That's
say,
right.
but it only keeps going up and up. And with Green, especially this year, the Rockets have been winning a lot more. So that really just makes those narratives about him not being a winning player and the empty stats going back to that point, it just really makes those points look ridiculous.
I was like, yeah, I think what the Rockets are like a game back from number one right now, aren't they, or something
Yeah.
like that? Like, yeah. So yeah, they're doing real well.
Exactly. So yeah, sort of thinking about social media as well. I know you sort of mentioned like those troll accounts like Centel and Brick Center, all those kind of accounts. But what do you think about the short form content specifically with a lot of these TV shows on ESPN, Fox Sports, whatever that tend to go viral on social media? How do you think that contributes to the authenticity or lack of authentic coverage that we're receiving?
Um, what exactly do you mean when you said short term content
Short form content, so more like
or short form?
TikToks,
Right?
like
Yeah,
into Instagram Reels, like I feel like we see quite a bit of that where it's just like maybe like a Kendrick Perkins, like not trying to call anyone out here, but like a Kendrick
yeah.
Perkins or like a Colin Cowherd just like making a ridiculous tweet or making a ridiculous take and then it gets posted to like a TikTok or an Instagram and just kind of goes viral, generates like millions of impressions, that
And
type of thing.
that's a good point. Because I feel like when you have a lot of influence, like it might not necessarily be how many. I don't know how many followers Kendrick Perkins has. Like he might have less than Stephen A, but he still influences people's like perceptions of what's going on with players. Like you might also because he was a former player, like people tend to take your opinions more seriously sometimes too. So it's like he's one of those people where I wish because sometimes I do feel like he is trying to be sensational, but I feel like he should be more careful sometimes about how like what he says because like and I don't know, he's tended to be somewhat negative sometimes. Like sometimes he's actually really positive, actually, but sometimes he seems like he's more critical of players than he's just like talking them up. And I mean, maybe it is because he's like a former player. Maybe he's trying not to be that guy. I don't know. I'm not sure because older players in the NBA seem like they don't really like the younger generations, and that's weird. As opposed to like when I watch older NFL players like talk about it don't even have to be the NFL, like just college football. But when they talk about players, they seem like they're really like real gracious about it. Like they'll be critical, to criticize, but they're really gracious about it. But yeah, as far as the social media, like I do feel like that's one thing about it. Like they know that negativity sells, and so they'll put out like whether it's just like like I said, like you said, a tweet or like a quick video, quick little hitter. Like they'll be real critical of a guy, like say it's Ben Simmons or somebody like that. I think what was it? They were saying LeBron needed to retire like last week, and it's like, dang, already? Like,
Well, too.
I was like, so one bad week he has to retire? Like this is so it's like you said, like it is, and but like like negativity sells, sensationalism sells, and social media it plays a big part in that because I mean you get the word out so fast, and I think that's the other thing about like a mob or group think type mentality. Like you see all those likes, like so if someone has like 50,000 likes, you don't feel wrong for clicking it. Like you're like, huh, maybe they're right. So I think that's another way that it kind of like alters people's perception of what's really going on. But I mean, I do feel like social media could be used in a positive way as far as sports coverage. Like, well, that's one thing about it. I feel like we have to be more positive about players, like because it is so easy to criticize them. So it's like I said, like a player has a bad game, you're like, oh man, what was that? Or a player's always injured, like Joel Embiid or Ben Simmons. You want to focus on that, but at the same time, there's so many players that are doing great things, and some of these players, like Norman Powell, for instance, great story for the NBA. Like it's like 27, 28 career season. Paul George just left. He's making, I think the Clippers like I want to say fourth or something like in the West, and it's like it's crazy though. Like we should give more attention to Norman Powell being great than Joel Embiid being out. Is how I feel about it. Because like that's the type of thing that'll draw a fan in. Because people were like, "Whoa, I didn't know anything about this guy." Like, oh, he dropped how much last night? 30, like on 5 threes. Like, oh, crazy. But I feel like social media would be good for that, but because negativity sells, I think that's what we or people just tend to use it for mostly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of good points there and a lot to unpack. But yeah, like the Powell example is really good. I mean, there's just so many underrated stories in the NBA that just don't really receive any mainstream coverage. I mean, you sort of have this like community of hardcore fans that give players the flowers they deserve. But in terms of mainstream coverage, I feel like it's really lacking. And then one thing I want to bring up, because you also brought up sort of other sports, I think it's interesting to think about, is this like a problem that's really unique to the NBA? Because in my eyes, I mean, I'm a diehard NBA fan, pretty big football fan, not as much like baseball, hockey, whatever. But when I
Right.
watch football coverage, I feel like it's a lot more analytical. I don't see these sort of debates about, you don't see who's the GOAT for football even. Like that's a constant debate in the NBA that just gets recycled and recycled. You really just don't see as much of that, and I feel like the coverage is a little bit more focused on the games. So I was wondering to sort
Yeah.
of get your perspective on that.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. It's funny you bring it up because like nobody asks is Tom Brady the GOAT all the time. Like you might hear it every now and then, but it's not a constant storyline. Like I think when you watch certain players like Mahomes or Lamar Jackson, they might get compared to Tom Brady, but it's not a constant who's the best ever. And even to that point, bringing up Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, like they get criticism because I mean you do have to criticize players, but they also really like celebrate it. Like people really love those guys. But so I feel like, and not just fans, but the people covering them, including the former players. And I think that's the thing that I wish like we had more consistently in NBA media. Like so, Shaq, for instance, like we all love Shaq for what he did, but but he's like he just always goes in on players. I feel like Charles Barkley used to be like that a little bit too, but I feel like now he's like more balanced with it. Like I feel like he's trying to be more balanced. But like a few years ago, he definitely was always on people's case. But like Shaq, like, and that's another thing. Like Shaq as a player, he was so great. So when he said somebody was sorry, like it's like I almost want to like take your side, but it's like I can't because it's like dang, y'all don't sound you making us not appreciate things. Um, it's like so Dwight Howard is a player like a lot of people don't really respect him. And I'm not saying it has anything to do with Shaq, but if Shaq was more like Dwight was the best center since I would have my dominance, and he said things like that. more consistent, more people might know about Dwight, and more people might be Magic fans. Who knows? Like, you know what I mean? Like, so I feel like it's little subtle things like that too, though. And yeah, he always goes in on Rudy, so I guess he could probably help him too, because it definitely doesn't help him Rudy's case for Shaq to always say he don't deserve nothing.
Yeah, no,
We'll
exactly.
say that.
Yeah, no, a
But
lot of good. Oh, sorry.
yeah. No, I was like, I was just gonna say, yeah, that was a good point about the different sports because yeah, it is a bit different for the NBA, but yeah,
Yeah, no, definitely. I definitely just feel like I see former NFL players trying to like uplift current stars now compared to the NBA. It's sort of like they're always trying to tear them down in a way. And the Shaq example's definitely a very relevant one because I mean, he is so particularly big men. I feel like I don't see it as much with the
yeah,
guards, but he really criticizes a lot of modern big men a lot. I mean, other than Nikola Jokic, because Jokic has won 3 MVPs at this point. I feel like
yeah,
any young big man coming up, like a Wemby even. I think he left. They did like their top 50, top 100 list, something like that, before the year, and he left Wemby off the top 50. Which I mean, if you
right,
watched Eddie basketball last year, I'm just like, I don't know how you can come to that conclusion at all. And then
right,
with the Dwight Howard point, they have a it's been well documented they sort of have like a long personal beef dating back to like the Dwight Howard Superman dunk. And I feel like Shaq
right.
really let that get in the way of really covering him in a fair manner, especially like in his prime. I mean, after Orlando, he definitely took a significant dip, but in Orlando, I mean, he was incredible. He won, I believe,
He
three
really
three
was.
defensive players of the years. Um, beat out LeBron in a playoff series, made the finals. I mean, I you got to give a guy like that some type of credit, and I mean, he should have been on that like top 75 list for sure. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
definitely a really good point there.
It would be like if Jordan was always saying LeBron. If like we know Jordan probably doesn't think LeBron was as good as him, but if we always heard it all the time, then I feel like it might impact the way we actually really do view LeBron. Because like I mean, Jordan just said you suck like 10 times already, bro. Like, it's like, why do you keep calling yourself the GOAT? The GOAT doesn't even think you have any business in the conversation. Like, that type thing.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, and I just thinking about like players coverage and like players transition into media a little bit more. What role in player-led podcasts do you believe how does that sort of affect authentic sports coverage? Do you think it gives us more of an authentic view of sports, or do you think it sort of takes away because a lot of these players are so critical of other players?
Well, there are a lot of players who are critical, but I do think it adds to the authenticity. I don't know if you are familiar with like Matt Barnes' podcast. What is it? The All the Smoke
Yeah.
production. Like he's a really good host. Like you know what I mean? Like because it's like of course he's a former player. And we know his personality that they had said he had when he was a player, but over time I think he's become like way more professional with how he covers players. Like he's really trying to get the story or get the meat of the story type thing. And it's like I really like that because like he's bringing his perspective as a player, but he's also asking for perspective from another player. And I feel like it's kind of like any things that are similar. Like a woman might feel more comfortable talking to another woman type thing. It's like I feel like players might feel more comfortable talking to other players. So I feel like that's a thing that might benefit him. But he's also savvy enough as a media professional to really like to do it the right way. Like he has his questions, he's going to go through them, or as many as he can get through, type thing. If it steers in a different direction, he might let it do his thing, but he'll keep bringing it back to the thing. And so I think that's one thing about it. Like it's authentic in the sense that he's a former player. He's not necessarily trying to be. He's not lying to anybody. Like he's not going to like really go in on nobody, but at the same time, like he's also like, I guess the word, he's fair. He's fair. So I was like, I think there's ones like that. Then I think there are ones like Gilbert Arenas', which I don't. I'm really not gonna lie, I don't really know the name of it, but Gilbert's Arena. I think that's all it's really called. But yeah, and that's one where I feel like it's real. It's just everybody's critical. I mean, they might hype up certain players, but it's really super critical. Like they don't like this guy, they don't like that guy. This guy couldn't play then. This guy couldn't play then. It's like, and it's good for views, especially because Gilbert Arenas is he's a character. The guy who's hosting it, Josiah Johnson, I want to say. is he's real big on Twitter. You know what I mean? Like a funny guy. So it's like it's good for entertainment, but it's not really good for the consumption. I want to say because I don't think it's really helping fans. Really, like you're not really learning anything. You're just getting some laughs, really. Like, oh, and I think there's also the Jeff Teague type thing. Now that's just super. You might not be learning anything. I mean, besides like personal stories, but it's also super dope though because it's like he's telling stories you would have never heard, like something you probably would have heard in a documentary like 75 years from now. Like, but he's just telling the stories and he's really funny for real. Like, and I think because he's honest. Like he'll say things like, "Yeah, I had a terrible game." Like, and it's like it's funny because you'll go back and you're like, "Yeah, he was like 1 for 13 though," but it was a great. Like he's great for sports media. I feel like because he's funny. He's not trying to. He doesn't really feel the need to dive into another niche. He's not trying to do the Kobe Bryant detail. You know what I mean? Or like what was JJ Redick's Old Man in Three? He's not trying to do that. He's just telling his stories with his friends and inviting other guys on to tell their stories. And I think that's great for fans in general because especially because you get to see it's not just Jeff T's personality, but the people he brings on. Like people saw a little bit more of. Derrick Rose has like a cult. But people don't really. I don't think we've ever really seen too many Derrick Rose interviews. So it's like he has a lot of fans, but they haven't got to see him interact like that. So it's like that was probably good for them. DeMar DeRozan was on there. He's a guy that I like, but he's a guy where, I mean, outside of his interviews about depression, which are very serious because mental health does matter, but he doesn't really talk a lot about certain things. Like he got some coverage this summer, but that was more so because he was attached to something that didn't even have anything to really necessarily do with him. So it was like seeing him on the Jeff T podcast and he's telling his stories about this and that. You also find out he's funny because like he had a couple of like he had some jokes with Jeff T. He was like, yeah, I wouldn't want to like only have one All Star. And you look at Jeff T, he got one All Star. Just like, and it's like, bro, you trying to come at bro, like, and it's like, yeah, I like that too. Paul George does well as well. Wish he wouldn't do it so much during the season, but especially when he was losing, because I was like, this is not the time to be dropping pods, bro.
Terrible timing.
But yeah, I do like players like whether they're doing it seriously like Matt Barnes or whether they're more like a Jeff T level. I do like when they jump in the game, the media game.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those examples are really good, and I really agree with sort of your perspective on that. I mean, especially with Jeff Teague, I feel like he does a good job sort of blending the humor with like I wouldn't say it's more coverage because it's more like just player stories, but it's
Right.
definitely a good blend there. And then Matt Barnes also does that, but also does a little bit more of like the coverage side. And then Gilbert Arenas definitely leans into more of the hot take side, the sensationalized style of coverage. Paul George, I thought that was a really interesting example as well. I mean, especially on one hand, I felt like when he during the offseason, when he left the Clippers, signed with the Sixers, that podcast was really good and it was really
Yeah,
informational just to
really
get that behind the scenes kind of look. But at the same time, the podcast he did right after the players only meeting, covering that. That
yeah. That was kind of
that's
weird.
not something you should be talking about when you're a part of a team. And he was in a way because they talked about it for like 1, 2 minutes maybe on the podcast, but he was sort of
Yeah,
clickbaiting with a personal players only meeting from the 76ers. So I always sort of wondered how
yeah.
that or like Draymond doing podcasts right after like losing
Oh
a
yeah,
game,
Draymond's one.
something
Yeah,
like that. It's like you got to be focused on the season while you're an active player in the league, and I feel like the
right.
podcasting side can sort of take away from that a little bit.
I think Jalen Brunson had said that maybe it was either Jalen Brunson or Josh Hart, but their roommates podcast, they were saying they were thinking about shutting it down during the season at one point because I think they're on like a losing streak. Like should we really be podcasting right now? It's like, and I feel like that's a thing. Like you guys have things you guys are supposed to be focused on, but I do feel like it's also insightful. Like when Draymond was talking about Klay Thompson leaving, like on the one hand, you might not give us, all the details, of course, but I want to hear how you feel. I want to hear it in your voice because I mean, you guys have been playing together for like a decade, so I want to see, how you feel about it. And like you said, Paul George, him giving us his side of the Clippers thing is like, yeah, even if you're not telling us the complete truth, I do appreciate you telling us like your side of things because I mean it's from the horse's mouth, so I don't need to read what uh, Keith Pompey or Ramona Shelburne or Shams even has to say about it. Like I mean, I will probably still read, but I did get to hear what you said.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely some good points there, and it's definitely sort of a delicate balance, especially for active players. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit, in terms of like big picture stuff, do you believe the optionality in terms of styles of coverage, with social media sort of outweighs the lack of maybe authentic coverage that we're getting?
I feel like it is like we were saying before. I think because there's more ways to show your personality and your genuine thoughts. I feel like that's a thing now, and well, people probably doing that when they were just writing, but I also feel like like I said, it was harder to get that tone across sometimes. Um, so I think that it is helping. Now whether or not everybody should be doing it is one thing, but I do think it's helping though.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so just in general, in terms of like style, we've sort of touched upon this a lot, but what role do you think social media plays in terms of people actually watching the games? Because that's one thing I see with just
Hmm.
different styles of coverages. I feel like they're not really watching the games, or if they are, they might be like kind of box score watching or not necessarily like fully concentrated. So just based off some of the takes we're getting and just based off how you can sort of consume a lot of content and sort of get um by being an analyst without technically watching a ton of games. Yeah, what do you think about all that?
You know, I feel like that might be, in a way, it probably is a negative because it might not be making people watch the games. Because like you said, you could just, go on social media real quick, and especially because now they have like the sports tab, and then like all the games will be shown at the same time. Then you just click on whatever game is commentary, so you can keep up with the game without actually having to watch it. So I think that is probably affecting viewership a lot because like some people probably feel like, why should I watch the game if I could just go on Twitter, whatever X, whatever we call it now, and just see what's going on with the score. Um, and like you said, a lot of people are just box score watching. Like, and I think that's somewhat to do with the fact that fantasy, or not even fantasy, but sports betting has become so big lately. Um, people aren't necessarily watching to watch. They just want to know if their bets hit, their parlay hit. And I mean, it's interesting because I think about like people that bet on boxing matches and like horse races. I feel like they actually do watch those things, those events, but I feel like it's the opposite for the NBA. But I don't know why though.
Yeah, no, it's definitely really interesting. And the point you brought up with betting is really a good one because I feel like even just pregame coverage, it's in recent years especially, and especially with the NBA, I would say, we've just seen like these shows, ESPN, TNT. It's instead of talking about maybe like more of the X's and O's and breaking down the matchup, it's Charles Barkley, what's your same game parlay? And even like all the little
Yeah,
ads, like it just comes up and it really promotes betting. And then I feel like in my eyes, I don't know if you necessarily agree with this, it sort of normalizes like player criticism on social media if like a player doesn't
yeah,
hit your bet. And I mean, somebody like Kevin Durant has really talked about that a lot. So yeah.
right. No, I agree. I definitely agree with all those points. And to your very last point, I do think is lending itself to player criticism because, I mean, sure, it might not be deep, but you'll see like 100 people say a guy sucks because not because he even really had a bad game, but because he, you know what I'm saying, he was like one off from the rebound they needed from the hit for that part of the parlay they hit, and it's crazy because it's like I just feel like it's unnecessary. Like I get it. I'm sure like a lot of players don't take it super seriously, but I do probably feel like Kevin Durant. Like I don't know if he takes it super seriously because I mean he's also promoting sport betting, but I also feel like he does recognize like I had to get a lot more hate than I used to, but like, and it's like not even necessarily like real hate. It's just like people just tagging you because you didn't, or just talking about you because you didn't do what they needed you to do. And I feel like but it also takes away from the game though because growing up, I don't know. I didn't even care like about whether or not a guy had a certain amount of points. Like when I was watching the game, it was like, is he good or not? Like some of my favorite players were good. Like they were good, but they weren't even like Like I like Michael Pietrus from the Magic, for instance, right? No one even knows who Michael Pietrus is, but I like bro because he was a good player for real. Like, but people would hate him nowadays because he was definitely not gonna get you the stats you wanted. Like he's a guy that you do not bet on. But but I feel like yeah, it just takes away from the game a little bit now. Sports betting ends not just because it's betting, but because it's a social media aspect with it. Because like guys are just going in on people now. Like, but like I said, it don't seem like it's super deep. Just you'll just see so many guys talking about a guy sucks or this or that, just because he was supposed to get 15 points, but he got 13. And yeah,
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it really definitely takes away from the game in many ways, and people, like you were saying, just solely focus in on the betting aspect, which is interesting. Just thinking about this in like a bigger picture type of view, do you think we've ever had truly like authentic sports coverage? Was there ever a time where it was sort of the perfect balance of authentic sports coverage, or has there always been problems in your mind?
I feel like I can only speak back to like as far as like 2000 or so when I first started watching like ESPN and stuff like that. But I feel like when I first was watching, I remember like before school, I might cut on Sports Center and it'll be like for personalities that was on ESPN seemed like I mean they actually enjoy watching the sport, enjoy covering the sport. They weren't there for I mean there was a guy, well, I mean, he's still there now, Chris Berman. He used to do this like Swami thing, but like, but outside of that, like, it wasn't guys like just trying to deliver takes. They were just giving you the coverage. They might have definitely made it known they was a fan of a guy, but it was just straight coverage. So I mean, on the one hand, it wasn't necessarily authentic in terms of the giving you the real thoughts, but it was authentic because I feel like they're not really trying to be sensational. They're just trying to give you the coverage you need. But I also feel like there was like other shows like it was weird. Like there was sports science and there was like the 30 for 30 thing. And I feel like those were authentic. Like the 30 for 30s are like those because you got the behind the scenes looks. The sports science was cool because like, oh, I would have never guessed that he was running as fast as a freight train. Like, you know what I mean? So it's like they're authentic, but in different ways. It's like I like it made you really like players more, but it's also like I said, like it wasn't personal feelings in it. So I wouldn't say it was authentic from that standpoint, but it was authentic because you weren't getting personal feelings, you also weren't getting people trying to sway you one way or another. Like they were just trying to let you know this guy's good, that guy's good. He could do this, which is like quite unique. Like we would never thought he could do that, or anybody could do that type thing. And I like, and speaking like how we were talking about Dwight Howard earlier, I feel like I think I saw him on Sports Science one time, and that's how I really knew he was like a different type of cat because it was like you're like 6'9". He's basically like the size of like a small forward, power forward, but you know he's dominating that center, and it's like it made me respect him more seeing him on a show like Sports Science. So it's like I feel like the authenticity from that standpoint, like it's weird because I feel like I wouldn't necessarily say like it was authentic people, just like you said though, the authentic coverage because you're not trying to make people think what you think. You're just trying to show them what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point and sort of a distinction to make where the coverage itself can be authentic, but maybe the personalities are less authentic because you're not able to really show that side of your personality back like 20 years ago without like social media, stuff like that. But at the same time, I do feel like uh some of these especially like on TV shows like First Take, for example, I don't want to just keep calling them out, but it lends
Yeah, no, I
itself to
understand
creating like a
those.
character, and really
Yeah,
not spewing authentic takes or not even being really like an authentic personality. You're just doing something for the performance of the show, and that something as since I'm 22, that's really the only style of coverage I've been aware
yeah.
of for my whole life. So it's just sort of interesting to think about that shift.
But honestly, yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it because it seems like First Take, for instance, like you're saying, is more of a performance art than a news coverage type show. And I mean, you know, it has there's benefits to it, of course, like you're saying, like you know, it's sensational. People like sensational things because I'm sure people still watch First Take, but it doesn't. It's just, I mean, it's performance. Like nobody wants to watch. actors all day, and we really necessarily trying to get like the nitty gritty on what's happening for real.
Yeah, no, exactly. And just with ESPN in general, I think it's pretty interesting to think about sort of their visible like public image where they're
Yeah.
promoting guys like a Pat McAfee's another example. I think he does a little bit
Oh yeah.
better job where he's not just attacking players, but he can be a little bit
Yeah.
goofier, less maybe nuanced style of coverage type thing, but he does a decent job. But the faces of ESPN are really shifting towards like a McAfee, a Stephen A. Smith, obviously, and then like a Kendrick Perkins, and it's shifting away from more of the coverage centric people, more like a Zach Lowe who they laid off. So I'd be curious to get your thoughts
Yeah.
on that. But also at the same time, I think it's important to acknowledge with ESPN. I tend to read a good amount of ESPN articles, and I feel like from a journalistic perspective, ESPN is still there and it's still very, very solid in that department. So yeah, just curious to get your perspective on all of that.
I will say I definitely go to ESPN and The Athletic the most to get like journalistic type views on things. Because I mean, like you said, that's still they can still do that, like for sure. Um, but as far as their faces or the changes or the shift, you could say, yeah, they are going towards the Stephen A. and Pat McAfee. Um, and it's weird because like even the guys that didn't lay off, it's like they're not focused on him as much anymore. Like Scott Van Pelt, SVP. We all love SVP, but I feel like he's one of those guys where he actually put his personality in, but he also was trying to give you. He was trying to do both. Tim Legler was kind of more coverage than personality, but at the same time, though, it was like I mean, I guess because he had more of a vanilla personality. I wouldn't even say he wasn't showing it. It's just, he's just he was just a vanilla guy. But it's like at the same time though, but like I feel like you need to emphasize guys like that because they help emphasize our understanding of the game. Because I mean, it's I remember growing up, I didn't like playing football at first because I didn't even understand what I was watching. Like I remember trying out for the team. Well, my homeboy, my friends at the time were asking me like, we probably like I started playing football late. So it was like probably like the fifth, sixth grade. And they were like, why didn't I play football? I was like, I don't even understand the rules. How am I supposed to play a game I don't understand? And I feel like that's the thing nowadays. Like people don't really necessarily understand the game as much as they could, and so they don't love it or like it as much as they could. Because I mean, I love basketball because not just because guys are scoring or because that assist look nice. It's just like I really like I love it. Like I really watch the game and I feel like I was like, oh, I like the way he flowed here. I like that cut that was right there. Like I sometimes I follow like coaching type uh social media pages. Like I have no ambitions of being a coach, but I just like seeing plays that guys run. Like it's just cool. But I feel like there's not enough fans like that, but I don't necessarily feel like it's their fault, perhaps as much as they're not the media coverage nowadays doesn't lean towards that. Like not the guys aren't really trying to focus on knowing the game or teaching the game, I should say. They just want to tell you that this is how they feel. You should feel that way too. If you don't feel that way, you're tripping. So and I think that's the big shift now. Like I feel like before you might have had some guys like that, maybe a couple, but I don't remember growing up and there was a lot of guys like that. I don't even think Stephen A. Smith was like that when I was growing up. Like I don't remember him being like that until like the late 2010s, like just like 5 years ago or so. It's like once they started focusing in on him more with First Take, like him and Skip used to go back and forth, and he used to have strong opinions about certain players, but it wasn't like his whole thing was being sensational. That was kind of more Skip's thing in a way, like Skip like I hate this guy, and like wouldn't he just be like Brian, like
Of course, it was Braun all the time.
yeah, he's going in on Braun for sure. But I was like, I feel like that was more of Skip's thing back in the day, like being sensational and throwing hot takes. But after Skip left, it was just weird because like they had Max Kellerman, and I feel like that was the thing that Max didn't like about Stephen A. Like he's like, and now Stephen A. used to play in college, so it's like it's not that you don't understand what you're watching. It's just, and that's the other thing I guess probably makes people mad. It's like you have to understand what you're watching. So why are you saying some of the things you say? Um, I just saw this video of him like in the gym with Lethal Shooter the other day, and it's like he was getting shots. I was like, "You look pretty good, like you did. You're so hoop for real." But it's crazy because you act like you've never played a game in your life. Like it's like it doesn't really matter what the X's and O's are to you half the time. You just want to say, "Why does this guy get paid any money at?" and it's like, like I said, I feel like there's times when that's cool to say, like, comedic relief is always necessary. I mean, it's cathartic. We're all human, but I feel like that just shouldn't be your whole spiel. And I think that's a problem with ESPN. It's not the whole spiel, but it's starting to get that way.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I feel like it a lot of good points there for sure. And just with Stephen A. Smith, it really just sort of brings back our discussion in my eyes of just the social media and the role that's played in sort of shifting the coverage. And then also just how different media platforms shift your style of coverage because on a show like First Take, you're so restricted by having commercial breaks, having everything be within 2, 3 minute segments, whatever the case may be.
Right.
And at the same time, there could be a producer saying that this is a take we have to get off because we think it's going to go viral. You have to take this side. You have to take that side. You got to debate each other. So it's very forced in a way. And I just
That's a
think
great
that's sort
point.
of interesting how ESPN's almost they're not necessarily adding debate shows like that, but they're doubling down on that style of coverage. Sort of you
Yeah.
could see that with like the Kendrick Perkins extension and then laying off Zach Lowe. Obviously JJ left ESPN to coach the Lakers, but they never really
Right.
found like a clear replacement for him. And then when you watch like
That's good.
shows like NBA Today, it's almost evolving into more of that debate style, even though that's not necessarily the format it started as.
That's a great point. And it's weird because I also feel like I think after JJ had got hired by the Lakers, I feel like they had announced extensions for guys like Richard Jefferson. It's like, it's like as a former player, he's one of those guys where you would want him to kind of step in, or he doesn't have to be the next JJ Redick. Like, you don't have to give us your full breakdowns or whatnot. But I feel like he was there to add more of a player perspective, and he does do that. But I feel like it's not as analytical as you might want it to be. But at the same time, like you were saying, because you have those commercial breaks and it's a 30-minute, at a halftime show, way less than that. So 10, 5, like maybe even like 8 minutes or so, you had to get these takes off. So it's like that could influence what he says and, maybe even how he says things, like not just RJ, but like everybody. But I feel like, that's why, like what you were saying about social media, like people going to Twitch or Discord or whatever, like they want to do, like playback is another thing. I thought about doing the playback part myself because it's like, you're watching live. And I feel like that's cool though, because it's not like I don't think, I can't recall any other real platform that gave it a chance to give your takes while things were happening. Like you might be able to give it right after the game at halftime, but I can't recall anything that let you talk during the game and people just follow along. Like, yeah, I feel like that too. And so I feel like that's the type of thing. Like, even if you are being sensational, it adds to authenticity because it's like you don't feel like you have to get off I mean, everybody might feel the way you might see somebody airball. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? Like, you might say this or that. Like, oh man, but at the same time, you don't feel the need to really get off a take per se. And I feel like that's the type of thing to where media needs to shift, probably like more live reactions towards things. Like, that probably help for sure.
Y- Yeah, absolutely. I think playback's a really good example of that. It sort of just balances out the style of coverage in a way, and it also creates a community where you can be watching the game
Yeah.
with potentially like thousands of people in a chat room and building that sort of excitement. I think that's really good for coverage and the sport in general. And then like another thing is sort of like Twitter spaces where you do like a post-game Twitter space with
Yeah.
like a bunch of fans to just discuss. And I think those things are super positive. With the playback stuff. Are you familiar with like Legend of Winning at all? Because I think he does a pretty good job of like balancing the entertainment side along with actually giving some like pretty well thought out takes.
He's how I found out about play. Like, I don't follow him per se, but he's how I found out about playback though.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's kind of like the face of playback, I feel like. And yeah,
Yeah.
he's just in my eyes a really good example of someone who he does have sometimes some bold takes, some hot takes, and it can
Right.
be some sensationalized style of coverage in some people's eyes. But at the same time, I feel like most of, at least like 90 to 95% of the things he says, he genuinely believes. And then
Yeah.
just with the playback stuff, it just creates, like I said, sort of a community and just being able to hear his reactions in real time is really cool.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. Like, I feel like that's the other thing about it because you get to see who people are and like, are you gonna like everybody? No, but most times, I mean, it's not even like a like or dislike a personality thing. It's like when I see Legend of Winning, it's like it's funny because it's like he has energy, he has charisma, he definitely likes basketball. So, and that's the other thing. I feel like a lot of people, how they say that, like not everybody who like even is in the NBA loves basketball or loves loves the sport. I feel like there's a lot of people who cover basketball who don't necessarily love it. Like you might have gotten into journalism in school, but you didn't necessarily mean to be a sports journalist. It's just what paid you. So I feel like that might be a thing that affects certain people's coverage too. So it's like you don't necessarily love the game enough, but if you watching the game and doing live reactions, like you definitely like this game. Definitely like that. I think that's the other thing. I think Gilbert Arenas does that. I want to say, I want to stop seeing him do that. Like watch that he's currently watching the game, and he's giving his opinions, and that's sometimes when you get real like the best of Gilbert Arenas because it's like he's not even throwing takes out there. Like he's speaking from as a former player, like what just happened? Like he was like, oh, I didn't even, I mean, I didn't even see that like that. But at the same time, you're also still getting like, I mean, he's him. Gilbert Arenas is him. Like, you know what I mean? Like his personality. That's what I do like about Gilbert Arenas. He does not change his personality no matter what.
He's
Ever
always
since he
gonna be
started
Gil.
showing his yeah, that's what I'm saying. He has not changed at all. Like, and that's what I do like about him for sure because there's a lot of people who like, and that's why I feel like it's weird about Stephen A. I can't tell if he's changing or if we only got bits and pieces of him before. That's the only thing that's weird about him because it's like I don't know if you also getting a lot of money now. They talking about paying him like 120 million. That might be changing
Nope.
what you have going on. But at the same
Exactly.
time, like, but it's you are who you are though, and I do like the fact that when I see Stephen A. like he has his swagger and whatnot. He reminds me of somebody old rich grandfather, uncle or something like that. And it's like it's cool, and I feel like those are the parts of like no matter what it is, like just regular TV or like we are saying, like playback. I feel like when people can see your personality, it adds to your coverage. And like I say, like people don't necessarily like everybody's not gonna like everybody, but I mean, as long as you actually genuinely, I feel like charisma is just really just being genuine more than anything. Like as long as you yourself, like I feel like that carries through the screen. Like even that girl that be sitting next to Kendrick Perkins, Cheney, however you say her last name.
Yeah, I'm not gonna try to butcher it, but yeah, yeah, I know what you're
Not
talking
even gonna
about.
lie.
Yeah,
But when I watch her, I feel like she's it's I might not agree with everything she says, but I feel like she's like herself though. Like and I like things like that though.
yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's really the important part of like sort of balance and really whatever style of coverage you prefer. It's just always important that for me at least to know that the person who's saying these takes believes them. And I feel like that's something we
Right,
could use a little bit more of just because I feel like a lot of the takes that we get are sort of forced in a way, but yeah, it's really refreshing to see
right.
people whether it be on TV shows, podcasts, whatever, really believe in the takes they're speaking.
Yeah, honestly, and that is the thing. I feel like sometimes you see a guy say something, and you like, you can't believe that. Like, why would you believe that? Like,
Yeah.
like we were saying the other day, like when somebody was saying like LeBron should retire this year, like, I don't know. You believe that now already? Like, I feel like we should at least wait like if he was playing like that for like a whole month. Or like, you know what I mean? Like, if we were looking at his averages right now, he's averaging like 16, 5 and 5, shooting like 40%. Like, I ain't gonna lie, Ron. This might be the end for you, my boy. But but I also feel like, yeah, that's the other thing, like you're saying, like because things are reactionary. A tweet about LeBron is going to do numbers, especially if you already got a lot of a lot of influence, a lot of followers on anything, really. Like that's going to do numbers. I think that's why Skip stayed with the stick for so long. Like, like, bro, definitely getting his views up off of those tweets. Like,
Absolutely. I
that
mean,
the Cowboys.
Skip is the wildest to me. I mean, Stephen A, I feel like we get to see a little bit more of a different side of him in the podcast and
Right.
stuff like that. But yeah, Skip is, I mean, I remember, I believe it was sort of when it was with the Kawhi Leonard thing, but I believe also sort of coincided with Skip going over to Fox Sports, where
Oh
because
yeah.
Skip's a Spurs fan. So when Kawhi
Yeah, yeah.
demanded a trade and all that drama, he refused to like call Kawhi by his name. He's like, he's number two to me, and he would just like
I remember
constantly
that.
hate
Yeah.
on him. Goes to the Clippers, and since the Lakers Clippers rivalry starts with LeBron, obviously Skip hates LeBron. Now he's like, oh, Kawhi, he's the best player in the, he's better than LeBron. I love Kawhi. It's like, how'd this total 360 happen? That's wild.
Yeah, Skip is definitely one of those guys where it's like, I don't know if you're saying what you believe or what you're saying will get you the most views because clicks or dollars at the end of the day. Like, so yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just going back to your LeBron point a little bit, I just think it's super interesting. Like, I mean, how much he can get criticized because when you look at his stats for the season, he's still averaging like 22 points, like 8 and 6 or something like that. And it's like, how
Yeah.
many guys? Nobody. I'm gonna answer the question just from right away. Nobody can do that at nearly 40 years old. It's unprecedented still. So
And it's
people
crazy.
just ignore that.
And that's how you know he has a lot of pressure on him because I was when I first moved down here to Georgia, my first year covering the Hawks was Vince Carter's last season. So I got to see Vince Carter in his last season, but also up close. And I will say, there was like what LeBron is doing at his age is far different than most people. Like for real, not even most people. My fault. Than anybody that's ever been 40. Like, so I feel like you know I was watching like a lot of his clips not even last, this morning. Or it could have been yesterday, but like I was just watching a lot of his clips, like his misses, like his defense, things like that. And it's like his age does show in certain ways, but he's also if you didn't know how athletic LeBron was in the first place, you wouldn't be sitting there saying he's lost it type thing. You know what I mean? Like because he's still more athletic, stronger, more skilled than a lot of players. Like and his numbers do show that still. And like I said, like you know, with Kobe, for instance, like his body started breaking down like rapidly. D Wade body started breaking down rapidly. Like like who would have known that it was going to happen like that type thing? But so it's like, is LeBron on that level? Like it could be happening in front of our very eyes. We don't necessarily see it, but I feel like it's also just the fact that he's just gotten so much criticism over his career, like, and it's normalized to talk about him like that. So I feel like people are just like as soon as he doesn't reach expectations or plays below his standards, I should say even more so, it's like yeah, he's done for. Like we've been saying it for like 4 or 5 years now. Like there's that one tweet, LeBron's 30 something now. Can't be going on much longer.
Oh,
And
I
like we
remember
said
that.
so
It
long.
was like
Yeah.
2015 too. That's like a decade ago
Yeah.
now. It's like,
That's
what's
what
going
sounds like. I think it
on?
was like 32, something like that. Like, so it's like, yeah, at this point, yeah, bro. It's like, and that's what I'm saying. Like, but again, that's just because he's one of those lightning rods for conversation. It's like, he might not. I feel like in recent years, there's been players who have become slightly more popular in a way. Like to talk about, like Joker is like last year he became more of a talking point than LeBron. Um, And then like right before that, like people love talking about Giannis. Like I don't know why people don't like. I mean, they do like talking about him still, but like it's like his hype train kind of slowed down. But I just feel like there are certain players who are lightning rods for conversation. And that's the other thing that social media helps you see, like that there are certain players, like I was saying earlier, like that people just love to criticize or even maybe hype up. But it's just certain players. So like Brunson's a player that people love to hype up. You don't really hear too much about Brunson's bad games, but when he does well, though, it's like, yeah, that was great. Love to see that. Kyrie is a guy people love to hate him, but now that people love to love him again, you don't see anything bad about him. He has a bad game, people don't say anything. I was like, and there's just guys who are lightning rods for conversation, like, and it could go one way. Like, yeah, Kyrie's probably a good example of that, but like, it could go one way or the other. But yeah, I feel like social media definitely helps you see who people really care about in the league, though, for real, though.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Brunson example is really interesting because I remember, I think it was around this time last year. He was having a terrific season. He ended up, finishing top five in MVP vote and this, whatever.
Right.
But I remember it was Becky Hammond on some ESPN show. She said that she doesn't
Oh
think
yeah.
he could be a number one option on a championship team because he's a smaller guard, and the history of the league shows that smaller guards typically aren't number one options. and she got a ton of criticism for that. And I mean,
Yeah,
that it's, I don't think she said anything wrong per se, in my opinion. I mean, I feel like it's a fair point of criticism, even though he's a
it
great
was a fair
player.
criticism.
And
Yeah,
especially just considering how many other players are criticized a lot worse and a lot less fairly. I just think it sort of reflects to your point, like Brunson's just a guy that for whatever reason the media's decided we like, and fans, of course, the Knicks have a huge fan base, so that probably plays a part into it. But a lot of people have just decided we're not going to really criticize Brunson as much, even though he does have clear flaws as a player. I think he's still top 15 players, a great player in the league, but
right.
we're not going to talk about any of the flaws. He could be a number one option on a championship team, of course. We're just going to sort of blindly follow that. So I just thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I don't know if there's an exact formula for what it is. Like I don't know if there's anything special about Brunson that makes him that way. But yeah, he is just a guy that I know. It's like people love to love him, like as opposed to love to hate him. So yeah, and I mean that's definitely cool for him though. Definitely cool for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so just thinking about yourself a little bit as a journalist, what is your sort of viewpoint on journalistic integrity and how do you go about that on a day-to-day basis?
I feel like integrity is such a loaded word, but it's definitely it's needed. Like integrity is needed in life in general. Like yeah, yeah. I feel like everybody needs integrity just in the general sense. But as far as journalism goes, Uh, of course, there's the basic things like plagiarism and things like that. Like, yeah, that's a no no. I feel like a few years ago, I remember when I first started working in the industry, I was working for this site called Fansite, and they got in trouble for that. Like around the time that I had started, and like not as a company, not like it was a company spread thing, but it was one guy who plagiarized off of another guy and just became a thing. And it's like it's crazy because like I don't know why you thought that would work. Like that didn't work in high school. Why would you do that now? But
Especially
I was
like
like, so yeah,
NBA, like it's so cool to like watch games and like have your own perspective. I could never understand that. Like
yeah.
that's something I've dealt with as an editor. Like it's crazy.
Oh yeah, yeah. And that's the other thing. Because I used to definitely do a lot of editing myself, and it's like, you might go through a guy's article, and it's like, there's an aspect of quoting that's like you needed the quote for the story, but then there's certain times where like the quote is a story, like, and it's like, or you see a guy's article and it's this guy's article, is this a whole other guy's article too though, like he definitely said that exact same thing and perhaps y'all just came to the same conclusion, but it's like sometimes it's just weird though. So I will say, yeah, from that aspect I feel like like I said, integrity is needed in general, but I wouldn't even I feel like you shouldn't even venture into the realm of copying anybody for real. I mean, it's good to learn from other people, and I think they say, reading other people's style makes you a better writer. And so I just read other people's stuff sometimes just because either you might have a perspective I didn't have, you might have a use of grammar that I didn't really think of. I started putting more personality into my writing after reading certain writers, because I just liked how it was type thing. So I feel like those are those things you could do from it. But yeah, there's an integrity aspect. I feel like as we were talking about earlier, like when it comes to talking about players and like player criticism, I feel like there's a certain integrity you got to have. Journalistic standards, like that guy that had got into it with Joel Embiid, Marcus Hayes, I think what
Yeah.
was his name. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You see, that's crazy though, because like, why would you even go there with it? Now, and I feel like most of us in the media industry was thinking the same thing. Like, okay, you don't have to like Embiid, you don't have to like him at all, but you didn't need to insert his his dead family at that. Like you really don't have to insert his family, period. But the way he went about things was like that's crazy, and it's like I feel like he really should have got some repercussions from that. Like the Sixers, it's not their job to give out penalties, even though they probably should have removed his credentials, probably. But the Philadelphia Inquirer, I feel like really should have like at least like issued a statement, like like they didn't do anything, like this isn't our standard at all. Like no, bro, like that's just not cool. So I feel like that's another aspect of it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Embiid example is a really good one, and that's something I've been thinking about because it's kind of happened recently. And just the more I think about it, it's just like how did the editor let that slip by? And it really feels like to me it was almost intentional just to make that article go viral. Maybe they weren't doing super well
Yeah,
views wise. I mean, I'm kind of speculating here, but like he follows up by saying, "Oh, Embiid hasn't been on the court. He's underperformed." Fair criticism. That's fine. I think personally Embiid's a
yeah,
little overrated. And then he goes into talking
right.
about his dead brother and then his son. That's just something that should have never been allowed from the writer's
Yeah.
standpoint, from the editor. That should have never ever seen the light of day. So that was just one of the
Like
craziest
honestly,
things
I
I've
feel
ever
like
seen.
even as a writer, like, and you've written before, so it's like for your mind to jump there as a writer, it's like like nobody's mind
Same.
really does it. Like, never have I been writing, and then I was like, you know what I should do? Bring up his family, like look up his loved ones to see what will really make him mad. Like, yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah, no, literally. Like I could not understand that for the life of me. Yeah, so just sort of wrapping it up. Last question I have for you, double question a little bit. So where do you go to find, I know you sort of mentioned the Athletic and ESPN for written articles, but in terms of like podcasts or maybe like YouTubers, TV shows, whatever the case may be, where do you go to find really like authentic good sports coverage, particularly NBA obviously? And then just anything you want to plug, any up and coming articles, any articles that are live, social media, whatever, feel free to plug that at the end.
Okay, for sure. Well, honestly, my favorite podcast at the moment is the Club 520 podcast. And, and of course, like I said, it's not analytical. I just enjoy the fact that these are guys, they're just guys. You know what I mean? It's like when you go to a pickup game and you're just hanging out with your friends after the game, or even, like in the middle of the game, like just talking to them, like shooting the breeze. And so I like that. I like that style. Um, but I also think that I like Tim Legler a lot for what he does because like I said, I think we need that more in our coverage. We need more guys with X's and O's. Not everybody can do it, but if you can do it well and people like you, like Tim Legler, like people like Tim Legler. So I feel like he's a guy that needs to be out there, um, more than a lot of other people. But as
Yeah.
far as any plugs, man, just go to Last Word on Sport, bro. Last Word on Sports for real. We have a lot of great writers, a lot of talented writers. Basketball, football. I think we cover other sports too. But yeah, a lot of talent over there. So check us out.
Yes, sir. Absolutely, Quentin. Thank you for joining me on this podcast. It was great talking to you, and I think we had a really productive and interesting conversation. So yeah, appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me on, man.
Absolutely. Take it easy, man.
Yes, sir. You too.